time.
Hi, this is Hélène Blanchette, president of MyJane. Welcome to MyJane, My Story. Our mission is to unite and empower women through community education, exploration of cannabis solutions to address our biggest health concerns like sleep, pain, and stress. There's so much overwhelming information out there, and we decided that we needed to come together and share stories by creating MyJane, My Story. This is a place to talk about real life experiences so we can be better and do better through an open talk. Every journey is unique, every path is special, and we are extremely grateful to have our guests here to share with all of us. This is a non-judgmental space where every question is necessary to learn and shift our perspective on this plant. Today we have, again, very special guests, two very dynamic men on our podcast, and they also have their own podcasts on which MyJane was interviewed last June. But today is more than a tit for tat or a reciprocal way of doing things. We invited these gentlemen for their innovative and creative thinking on helping brands navigate the complexity of marketing within the industry of cannabis. Let's first meet Rico Montañez and James Jordan from the Emerald Forge podcast. Hi, guys.
Hey, how you
Welcome.
doing?
Hey,
MyJane, My
hey,
Story.
how's it going?
Good, good. Happy
Nice
to
to
have
see
you.
you.
with us.
Thank you
Yes,
so much for having us on the show today.
my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you for being with us. And before we get into important topics such as branding and marketing into this restricted cannabis world, let's begin by your MyJane story. We're about hearing how you actually stepped into the world of cannabis. I mean, I know that Rico, you're from insurance corporations, video production, and James, a different background as well. What got you here? Let's start with Rico.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you again. So, entrepreneurship has always been kind of my passion. My dad ran his own business, auto mechanic shop, and so when I started with State Farm, you mentioned insurance. That was my first foray into the career world. I was helping business owners open a State Farm office. So, not the sales representatives, but the people that actually wanted to sell and open their own business. And so I helped them for almost 9 years. Not only finding them, but also helping them build their business plans and figuring out all the aspects of what is it going to take to actually open and run that business. From there, I moved into marketing. So now that I kind of had the foundations of understanding what it took to build a business, I wanted to figure out now how do we get that message out about that business. So we got into marketing and understanding what it took to actually, again, get that exposure for those brands. And that was right around 2018 was when I started with the marketing company. Lure was actually the company I started with. And that actually, so 2016 was when California had just gone adult use, but it really didn't start kicking off until 17 or 18. So right when I started in 2018 in the marketing world, we wanted to look at new emerging markets, and cannabis was brand new. It was still kind of emerging as an adult use or recreational. And so, and looking at the marketing that was out there already, it looked all the same. Everybody was talking the same demographics. It just wasn't really, there wasn't a lot of cohesiveness there in the marketing world. And so I thought, for one, it's an emerging market, but for two, there's a lot of opportunity for us to bring the skills and the tactics and the strategies we use in the other industries into cannabis. And so I really started diving into the cannabis world. And so, but in doing that, I mean, I've always been a fan of cannabis. I got my medical card when I first got out here back in 2007. I've had it forever. But when I got into it, I realized how much more cannabis was than just the plant, right? Just than just the experience of actually getting high. That's when I met James around that time as well, and his amazing group, which he'll talk a little bit more about, SECBIG. And so helping entrepreneurs and building business has always been a passion for mine. And when I got into the cannabis space and started exposing it from a marketing world, I saw how much they needed help and how much there was a lack of resources and tools for them to build. You know, the traditional small businesses, you can go to a lot of small business resources and they'll help you SBA, this, that, and the other. Cannabis doesn't have that. And so even just starting to get into that exposure of marketing, I realized all the opportunities and gaps that were there in the industry. And so that's when James and we started developing friendship. We both started saying, man, do you see this they don't know what they're doing here, and there's nowhere to find this, and there's nowhere to find that. And so that's when James and I said, okay, there's got to be an opportunity for us to be able to help bring these resources to people for free. And that's where Emerald Forge came from. It's a podcast designed to help cannabis businesses find the resources in all different verticals, from marketing to accounting to even just new tech. We love bringing on new techs and what's happening. And so the Emerald Forge was designed out of my passion and James' passion to help the cannabis industry find those resources and tools. And so, yeah, that's kind of my little story.
Yeah,
there.
and we'll get back on that soon. But James, how did you get into this, the cannabis industry?
Thanks, Helen. So for me, I got in by, I was asked to fund a dispensary. This was like 6.5 years ago. And at that time, it was very taboo to talk about investments and cannabis, particularly because everything was structured in like a mutual benefit corporation, which was like nonprofits. It's very, very difficult to fund cannabis investments back then. So I called some friends of mine from New York. Shout out to Matt and Frank. And we put together a deal for a pre-ICO dispensary here in LA that's still there. And that really sucked me into the industry. And I had to figure out what was going on, supply chain, all these other random problems, and just crazy fracturedness of the cannabis industry at that time. And lack of
structure, right?
Oh, it was insane, totally insane. And so from there, I was really curious about helping startups. So we started this meetup group called the Southern California Cannabis Business Investment Group. Yeah. And at the time, it was really just designed to find investors for the Colorado market that had just opened up. There was commercial properties that needed debt, and there was no investors at that time, zero. And so we started a meetup group to kind of find these people. And what happened was all these people showed up, the community showed up. They're like, hey, this is cool. What else can you teach us? And so it turned into this giant community that wanted to learn about this emerging market. And so we generated topics in every sector, everything from medical to branding to marketing to, supply chain to licensing, real estate, investments. And so we've spent the last 5.5 years basically meeting every month, and we've served over 10,000 people in Southern California, really trying to educate each other and build a cohesive network so that people can rely on each other. They can ask each other questions, network, find out all this good information, because coming from an entrepreneurial background myself, it's sometimes hard to find resources, particularly in an emerging market with all the problems that cannabis has with lack of banking and, the high cost of entry, and then so much turnover, and then the police want to, it's just like such a crazy space. So I felt like we really needed this really deep network of people that took care of each other and that they could ask each other questions. And that's kind of how I got started.
And you mentioned something important is how, the structure and the complexity. So what is that complexity that people have when they get into the cannabis? They get excited because it's a new industry. They think they're going to be in the new gold rush of the 1800s.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And then, right, it really is similar. And then they see, they get in, and then is the complexity on how to build a brand in the cannabis industry, how to market, what's allowed, and it's very complex. Address that a little bit so that for our audience that may not be as familiar, what is that complexity?
Absolutely. So I can kind of talk a little bit with a quick story on that. So for one, you have just the basic business, right? Every business has the complexity of how do you market, how do you reach your demographics, how do you build your business, all the basic business aspects, because 80% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. So that's just to start with, right? Then you add on top of that all the regulations and compliance and everything that comes on top with cannabis, and it gets so crazy complicated. And one of the best stories was when I first got into marketing with cannabis, I brought it to my founder and he's like, absolutely, let's dive in. And we really quickly realized, wait, all the channels that we traditionally use, Facebook, Google, Instagram, all these things are not at all real channels that the cannabis can dive into. They can dip their toe and hope that something doesn't happen. So, and it's all compliance based, and there's so many rules as to who you can to and what words you can use and what words you can't use. And so that really started me to go, wow, not only do we have, again, the complexity of figuring out the digital marketing scheme as a business in general, but now you add on this, you can't do all these compliance issues. And so that's just marketing. Then you got legal and licensing and all these other aspects that have the exact same, and they're constantly changing. That's a huge thing. Unlike most other industries, there's constant legislation coming out every day, every week. That's now, okay, well, what you were doing the last week, you can't do it anymore. Oh, you were advertising this way, can't do that anymore. Oh, now your packaging used to have this little barcode. Now you can't do barcodes, you need UPC codes. So like, it's changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
That is another complexity that you add on top with cannabis.
Yeah, I think you have to be very nimble, let's say. You know, the rules are kind of changing all the time. And, you know, I think that there were a lot of people who came from other industries and they're like, you know, we're just going to apply our methodology from so-and-so company, and then this is how it's going to work. And they tried to overstep like the long history that cannabis has, particularly in California. It's entrenched. People already know a lot of times what they like, and they don't want to step over some of these things. And I think it took a lot of companies out. You know, you've seen a lot of people try and come in, and a lot of people go right out. What has really kind of surfaced is that the business fundamentals are super important. Making sure that like you're picking one thing or two things at a time, staying focused on one or two products, and then figuring out how to get that to that specific consumer. Because the market is so fractured, you know, cannabis products you cannot buy at every liquor store like you would a soda or a piece of gum or something like that. So localized distribution to retailers is so important. So if you're going to launch products, you really need to understand that localized retailer and how they interact with those consumers that you're trying to acquire.
And what's the demographic, right? Because
100%.
different
100%.
cities and different dispensaries have different demographic.
And that gives you so much feedback for how you're going to do your branding. You know, if you're branding for, you know, a certain type of demographic, you got to understand the retailers that are serving that demographic. And when you're doing your marketing, you know, you can't be going, we talked about this the other day, is like, you can't just be going after blanket Coca-Cola marketing where one size fits all and you're going to be in every retail store. You really need to focus on exactly who your customer is, and then understand where those dispensaries are going to be, because you can't sell cannabis products in every store. It's very, very limited. So you have to go, I know that this store in this particular city is the type of demographic I want to be in. So I have to find the distributor to get my product into, to get in that retailer. And then you focus on working with that retailer to make sure that your point of sale and your end caps and all that stuff are really highly focused where you can convert into sales.
It's really back to guerrilla marketing.
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
It's really
and complicated guerrilla marketing, right? So it's not again, you can't, there's so many rules as to if you put your marketing in the wrong place, too close to a school, too close to this,
Right.
you can get hit. So like you think, oh, I'm just going to put up a bunch of posters talking, you can't even do that, right? So there's so much that you have to know before you get into this. It's like playing guerrilla marketing with your hand tied behind your back and your foot tied, you know, like it's really complicated. Yeah, it's super
and same
complicated.
thing with social media, you know, like you work so hard in building a following, and then suddenly you use the wrong words, or you're saying the wrong things, and you get shut down by Facebook or by Instagram. You lose everything. You have to start all over, and that's certainly a difficult situation to be in.
And with speaking to that real quick, sorry, Jane, but speaking to that, and the interesting thing is that those Facebooks and those Instagrams, you don't just get to start right back over. People think like, oh, if it gets canceled, you just start another account. That's not how Facebook and Instagram works. If you're flagged, your email, your business is flagged, you have to wait a significant amount of time before you can apply to potentially try to start another account. So it's such a big deal when your account gets taken down from Instagram or social media that businesses don't even want to put the effort and energy into building it. Not for real, because they're like, it just could get shut down at any moment. So right. It's really difficult.
Yes.
One tool that I try and recommend to a lot of the startups, because we see a bazillion startups in the meetup group, is build your advisory team. You know, have your like 4 or 5 people that, let's say you're trying to accomplish some marketing, you know, really do your homework on LinkedIn and then the networking and all that stuff, and try and build an advisory team so you can bounce these ideas off of. because if you're just going from some playbook that might be outdated or not up to date, you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money going in a direction that may not be where your goal is. You need to have some thought leaders in your space so you can have a sounding board on.
So, I mean, you just touched on it, but necessity is the mother of invention. You guys have been helping brands. What kind of innovation did you bring to the table, and how do you navigate this complexity for your clients?
So I'd say that one of the big things, we had a business that kind of branched out of Emerald Forge called Emerald Market, and it was designed to help brands connect to sponsors and to events to sponsor. So events, one of the biggest opportunities for marketing pre-COVID, this is all pre-COVID, was events, right? You couldn't do the Facebook, you couldn't do the social media. So events were the place where you could have experiences with your customers. You could really have them understand what your product is and enjoy it. But a lot of those events were struggling to find the brands because there was no way for them. There was no general marketplace where you could just go to and find brands and say, hey, I have this great event. It's a lifestyle event. Who wants to be a part of it? It was kind of hearsay, word of mouth. People would try to connect it. So James and I started Emerald Market to kind of help bridge that gap, to help brands that are looking for great events and events that are looking for great brands, but also to bring a real effectiveness and an ROI to that space. Now, that was all pre-COVID, right? Then COVID hit and all events got shut down. And we were like, whoa, what, right? All that digital marketing that was barely anything, right? Nobody was really using it as a primary channel because it was so volatile, was now the only opportunity, the only channel that brands had to be able to market and advertise. Events were completely shut down. So Emerald Market, James and I had to pivot. We had to say, okay, how do we continue to help these brands get exposure? How do we continue to help these brands and these events grow and build and get in front of these customers? Because everybody wants that. The customers want to know the brands that are out there and the new innovations, and the brands want to connect with the customers, but they couldn't quite figure it out. And so we have some really, really cool innovations coming out. We've had the R&D department kind of really racking it hard to try to develop some unique and interesting new technologies for virtual events. And my goal, in truth, is for cannabis as an industry to lead all other industries in kind of innovation in the event space and connecting with their customers, because they have to. It's like you said, it's out of necessity. We have no other way to market and advertise, not right now anyways. So we have to now take this event space, make it virtual, and make it so engaging for people that they now can almost replicate what that was in the live events. So we have some really, really cool, innovative.
What it's going to be?
Well, we'll just say augmented reality might be involved. We'll just leave it at that. We'll just leave.
That's a good teaser.
We have some really cool, and it's all about really creating an experience for the customers, right? That's the most important piece, because that was the piece that the live events had that digital didn't, was that you could create an experience that people could remember. And they're like, oh my God, I love that brand. I remember that one time. So now how do we do that in the digital world? And so that's what we're working to kind of replicate.
That's excellent. I can't wait to see that, because we're doing monthly event, as you know. So for us to
we got some cool stuff coming. It's coming.
I'm sure I'm going to receive a phone call when that's ready to go.
Absolutely.
James, you started as an investor, and lately I hear a lot of complaints from women that since the big finance guy and the big VC guys, because obviously the industry is becoming very interesting for a lot of people. So the bankers, the VCs are coming into the industry. They don't know necessarily about cannabis. They just want to have a big return on investment. And the women seem to be more and more ignored, because women have come to the industry as nurturer. They come from a medicinal aspect of it. They want to ensure that, we understand the benefit and the medicinal benefit of the plant. And now that the big guns are coming in, we feel that the efforts that women have put into the cannabis industry are now, like eroding.
Sure.
I saw that you guys have actually made it like a clear statement that you have a women in the industry on your podcast. What do you see right now? How do you see what's going on? And is it becoming Silicon Valley?
You mean with capital? So like, there's been a huge, like cannabis capital is so strange. It's like, the first gold rush was real estate. So you saw this happen in Adelanto where people were trying to buy a property, like total speculation buying in real estate. That market totally peaked and then flattened back out. And so a lot of people were held people still own property in like Cal City and Adelanto. They're just hope someday it'll turn on. The reason that was happening is because there were not a lot of markets opened at that time. So now that more markets are opening up, and people are getting more comfortable with cannabis, that stuff is kind of dead. So that was like the first trend. Then you started to see big New York finance companies come in and make investments into brands, trying to acquire and consolidate brands. That has not necessarily penciled out for everybody because there's, in any emerging market, you need access to capital. Like all the startups need capital. There's got to be growth capital. There's got to be everybody has to get behind and push. And with so many restrictions and obstacles to the market, capital has been very finicky, especially when you saw like the Canadian market kind of fall on its face as well. Everybody who was like betting long on cannabis is like, well, if we can't do it there, well, maybe all these buys in cannabis in the States are maybe not that great either. So what you've started to see now, what I've seen in the last 6 months is kind of like back to brick and mortar. The finance people who are like, we're betting on brands or, supply chain stuff. And that really didn't pencil out, especially with CBD. CBD fell on its face. People are buying brick and mortar. And this isn't really necessarily like a men versus women thing. It's really like they're looking at the asset. They're like, what am I buying and what can I recoup and weather the storm? Particularly because we're in like a political year. People don't really know what's going to happen. The stock market's all over the place. Real estate is totally overinflated right now. People are really holding on to capital right now. And, that's impacting every space in the cannabis market. So when people are looking for capital right now, unless they have assets that they can collateralize and they're looking for debt or some type of convertible debt, very hard to get capital right now, especially when you look at like, sort of like ArcView or like these sort of like funding platforms that are out there, even Canopy and Canopy Growth in Colorado. Originally they were doing startup stuff and then they pulled back and now that's only growth capital. They're like, everybody's hedging their bets right now. So in an environment like that, you have to go to, and this is just my opinion, okay? You have to go to the crowdfunding. We worked with a couple companies in doing crowdfunding, and the cool thing about crowdfunding is that you have access because they're not necessarily accredited. You can gather $100, $200, $500, $1,000 from like 10,000 people at a time. It's really about how you sell your story. So what I've seen, and look, I don't get paid to say this, but I wish I was, is that crowdfunding is the solution for people who are seeking capital in the next 18 months. Because of where the capital markets are at, crowdfunding is an awesome solution. You get to tell your story, you get to share it on social media, and you can raise a lot of capital. We had some very good friends raise, 140 grand for their company just last year. It's great.
So now
Yeah,
go ahead.
And I was going to say, and I think that's kind of bringing it back to what you were saying about women. So that's where, since it's not coming directly from the corporate money, like James is saying, that it's becoming this crowdfunding space where a lot of people are trying to find money. It allows the opportunity for minority groups and disenfranchised groups, women, Black and brown people, to be able to go and tell their story and have other people support them. So it's kind of saying that there's an opportunity for these disenfranchised groups to go and find other outlets to bring money in, because the corporate world isn't investing in really anybody, not women, not Latinos, not really anybody.
Yeah, no, and even if it has been deemed as an essential service, which should have brought a little bit more attention to it.
It's a mess.
So now we're going to conclude because we already are out of time. I can't believe this, but how would you like to see your story played over the next couple of years with Emerald Forge and helping the brands? How do you see that coming?
I think for me personally, I want to be kind of a beacon, if we can, of support and help for brands going out there, both small, medium, large, everybody, just kind of giving resources and tools, helping to destigmatize the industry and really help to build community. I think that was the big thing that cannabis had from the very, very beginning, is community. We've always supported that, and I don't want us to lose that. So I want to serve as a beacon of community growth and development, and helping to bring businesses together to make this thing really function and work really, really well.
And I have two pieces. One is the fundamentals. So I really want to make sure that if you're in the startup mode or whatever, you have an idea, that you really get down to the fundamentals of what a startup is, you know, and one product, how do you get that product to market? How do you get to your first dollar? Like really focusing on your fundamentals so that you can maximize that first dollar experience, get there super fast and scale. So one is fundamentals, and two, I guess, would be, you know, right back to community, making sure that like you are getting the resources and network around you to support you through the ebb and flow of a startup. Startups are notoriously difficult, especially in an emerging market, especially in cannabis. That's like a triple threat. So make sure you insulate yourself with people around you who can give you good feedback and you have good sounding boards.
So people, if they want to reach you, what's the best way to reach you, and what's your website? And again, your podcast?
Emeraldforge.co. You can jump onto the website there, and we have all of our episodes there, and you can kind of take a look and see. And we have it across all the verticals, again, from marketing to fun. We even do one on crowdfunding, which is what James was just recently talking about. So emeraldforge.co if you'd like to check us out.
Well, Rico Montañez, James Jordan, it was a pleasure to have you on My Jane, My Story, and good luck for the next chapter.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you again, Helene.
We love you and support you, and you know, we only want you ladies to succeed in whatever we can.
Absolutely. We love My Jane. We love you. Thank you so much.
The community is both men and women. That's great. That's right. Thank you so much. That was a pleasure having you on this show.
It was.
Thanks for tuning in to My Jane, My Story. If you want to learn more, you can join the My Jane community at myjane.com. Get instant access to our Facebook group, Facebook community, educational resources, and updates on My Jane products and special events. And for personal attention right now, you can also pick up the phone and call 833-MY-JANE2. That's MYJANE2. Speak to your own wellness concierge, because it's time to own your wellness. Be well.